What do you see in the world around you? Do you see the things that have been, or imagine the things that might be? Have you misplaced your sense of wonder? Would you like to get it back? Science fiction is a way to travel into the infinite worlds of the possible. And when you've come back from your travels, you see the everyday world through new eyes. You know what you need for science fiction? You have to believe that there will be a future and that it will be different from the present. And you have to believe that we have the power to make anything that we want into the future. I'm Warren James, and welcome to the premiere episode of the Sci-Fi Trader, the beginning of a journey that will explore ideas from science fiction, science fact, and all parts of the human experience. Along the way, we're going to meet fascinating people and bring you products that will excite your imagination. For example, one of the most eagerly awaited books in science fiction today is the authorized biography of Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek. In a few minutes, we'll be talking with David Alexander, the man who Gene Roddenberry personally picked to write his story. And we'll be offering signed first edition copies of that book. Now, you're also going to get a chance to see some interesting props from famous science fiction movies and television shows. Now, all those things are coming up in the future, right here. You know, it's probably not an accident that one of the first real works of science fiction was The Brick Moon, which was written in the 19th century by Edward Hale. Now, this book, it makes it obvious that it was written by a person who was living in a society that had recently proven that people can take control of their future. But as much as science fiction is connected to the future, it's also deeply rooted in its time and place of creation. Science fiction paints pictures of the possible, using symbols from today, because that's the only way it can speak to us. You know, a good example of this comes from Star Trek. The two captains of the Enterprise, Jim Kirk and Jean-Luc Picard, are very different people, and their differences are largely due to the difference in the nature of the times in which they were created. Now, we were talking about this on the set earlier this week because we were looking at the very first collectibles that we're going to be offering on the show. This is Joshua Miller, my co-host, and we were talking about the differences between Jean-Luc Picard and Jim Kirk, and since I deal with words and Josh is an artist, we express ourselves differently. Josh, I like that picture you've been working on.
Thanks.
Let's show it to people so they can see what you've been doing.
This is a rendition of Captain Jean-Luc Picard looking out his ready room window gazing at the stars.
And in the reflection in the glass, he sees James T. Kirk.
Mm-hmm.
How'd you come to be doing that?
Honestly, it was for the initial premiere product.
You mean the 4-inch pewter figures that we have?
Right.
What we've got are these very nice 4-inch pewter figures of James T. Kirk, Jean-Luc Picard, and Ben Sisko from DS9.
And the detail is astounding. I've noticed on simply James T. Kirk. When I looked at him initially, the first thing I noticed was the starburst on the left side of his chest. I can literally see in the insignia, the Federation insignia, I can see the starburst. I could literally do a drawing just from the detail done on these figures.
Mm-hmm.
I had pictures for these, but I could have used these.
You could use those, yeah, and the detail is carried through all of them. Each one has neat little details, the sideburns and the patterns of their uniforms and things. It's very great attention to detail here. The other thing about them that's neat is the really high quality in the casting, the molding, the whole process of making them. You know, what's also neat is this is unique opportunity here because what we've got here on Sci-Fi Channel, on the Sci-Fi Trader, we have the three captains all together as a set. And that's something you don't normally find. You know, there was interesting, we talked earlier just a little bit about leadership style and how Kirk and Picard were very different people. And that's even reflected in these pewter figures. I mean, you think about it. You look at Kirk here. Kirk's standing. He's got his hands by his side. His fists are kind of balled up. And then Ben Sisko is real laid back, has his hands behind himself. He looks very open and very friendly. And so it's neat that the leadership styles, the personalities and characteristics of the guys are all carried over right in these pewter figures.
And what's interesting is the characters themselves were created in such different times that you can really tell, each one being Kirk 20 years ago, his personality, which they have shown perfectly in the figurine is highly different from the two that are really very modern.
Well, right. That's because Kirk was basically before the Vietnam era really got going, whereas Picard is post-Vietnam, totally different set of values and viewpoints. And so their characteristic in nature is reflected in everything that they do. I think this is a really good value because of the way you've got the three figures assembled together here, and they're very nicely made. You know, the neat thing, too, is they're so heavy. A high-quality pewter, it's very dense, it's very heavy. The other thing is, for some reason, they're a lot of fun to pick up and hold. It seems like everybody's doing that whenever we have them sitting around.
You can tell they've been picked up because they're warm.
Right, and now we're going to go over to Amy, and Amy is going to tell you how you can get your very own set of pewter figurines.
These three figurines have never sold together, and if they were seen sold together, they'd go for over $100. Today, we're giving them to you for only $89.95. If you think that's great, I'm not finished. Along with that, if you purchase the figurines today, we will give you the official Star Trek communicator with activating sound. This normally retails for $15.95. So we've got the three figurines, the official Star Trek communicator with activator sound, would normally go for $120. But today, if you order this now, we'll give it to you for $89.95 when you call 1-800-SCI-FI-60. One other wonderful feature is that these figurines are made out of pewter. What that means is they will not rust, you don't need to polish them. Basically, what I'm saying is these guys will look as great as they do now 10 years from now. Hey, maybe they can make me a husband out of one of these things. I mean, wouldn't that be neat? If we knew that our spouse would look the same 10 years from now, we could just dust them off every now and then. And three figurines, communicator.
You know, I enjoy collecting figurines like these because when you see them on your bookcase, they evoke memories and stories that you've enjoyed. And remember, as always, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee. Coming up next, David Alexander talking about his long-awaited book, the only authorized biography of Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek. I recently finished reading a fascinating book that told the story of Gene Roddenberry's life and showed the problems and heartbreaks associated with creating a groundbreaking TV show. This book paints a believable portrait of a man who was simultaneously a saint and a sinner, a visionary who at the same time was immersed in the era he lived in. That book is Star Trek Creator, the authorized biography of Gene Roddenberry by David Alexander. I'm pleased to tell you that we have a number of autographed first edition copies of this book and that you can get one for your phone. I'd like to introduce you to David Alexander. David, thank you for joining us. I'm glad you could be here.
Nice to be here.
How is it that you got introduced to Gene Roddenberry and became his official biographer?
Well, I ran into Gene at a humanist conference in early 1990 where I was being confirmed as the editor of their magazine. I asked Gene for an interview, and he said sure. And we went from there. It was a 6-month-long interview. I stretched it out as long as I could, and we became friends in the process.
And then at some point after that, when did he select you as his biographer?
Well, I figured out later that the interview was sort of an audition to be his biographer. He was evidently looking for one, and I found out later after he had told me that he wanted me to do it that he had been referring to me at the studio and amongst friends as his biographer months before he bothered to tell me.
Very nice of him to tell you.
Yes, yes.
You know, everyone's familiar with Star Trek and the stories and all those things. But what about the stories behind Star Trek? Like, what were the influences on Gene Roddenberry that molded his creation of Star Trek?
Well, it just didn't pop whole out of his head. It was a developmental process over a number of years. He took elements from shows that he had developed earlier, like APO 923, which was a pilot that he had developed for Screen Gems, where there was a smart officer and an emotional officer and a kind of a captain that held things together. He took parts from a dirigible series that he had thought of, where people would ride in a dirigible in the 1890s around the world, righting wrongs and doing daring feats.
Yeah, well, I had a multi-ethnic crew and all variety of
That's
things.
correct. And then he had an idea of about 20 years before The Love Boat made it on television, he had an idea for a show on about adventures of people on an ocean liner. And the element there that he took was not only the interaction of the crew members, but also the ship itself as a character, which we later became known as the Enterprise.
Well, what about in his real life? I know that influenced his fiction, his writing for Star Trek and other things.
Oh yes, he was influenced a great deal by one of his early teachers, a Mrs. Virginia Church in high school. She was the one, she was already a published author when she was teaching school, and this woman was able to show Gene that you could write on a number of different levels, and that's one of the things that characterized Gene's writing, is the multi-levels that he could write on. Social commentary, philosophy, a number of different levels at the same time.
Well, also, weren't there some other influences from his wartime experience? I know he served in the Pacific, so that must have influenced the one show that he did, but what are some of the other influences in Star Trek?
Well, he was a bomber pilot in World War II, but after the war he went to work for Pan Am, and in 1947, in June 19th to be exact, he was deadheading back from Karachi back to home port in New York when the plane he was flying on had an accident. The wing caught on fire, the engines caught on fire, and the pilot had to get down from 10,000 feet to do an emergency landing on the Syrian desert on a moonless night. It was very dangerous. The wing was totally engulfed in flame, and Gene was sent back to calm the passengers, and that's the only reason that Gene survived, because the entire flight deck, all the officers were killed in the crash. It affected him such that he very rarely talked about it for the rest of his life.
Yeah, because most people don't know about that. I mean, we've got a photograph of it.
Yes.
And it's in fact included in your book.
Yes.
And that influenced him, it gave him a love for life greater than before?
Well, yes, and it also impelled him into doing something kind of unusual. He came home and got his first wife pregnant within days of coming home, and that was the beginning of his first daughter, Darlene.
Amazing. I'm surprised you didn't call her Syrian or something.
Well, what had happened was I realized the juxtaposition between her birth and how close it came to him returning. And I called her. I called her at her home in Las Vegas, and I mentioned this to her, and she realized what an inscription on a photograph that he had given her a few years before finally meant. And the inscription was, "Darlene, I came back determined to have a child, and I'm glad it was you."
Ooh.
And up to that point, it had been a complete mystery to her. She didn't know what that meant.
Interesting. You know, you said how Gene learned from his high school teacher about writing on different levels.
Yes.
He did that a lot with his stories in Star Trek. You know, they had messages. How did he manage to sneak those messages through the network censors?
Well, Gene could be basically looked at as the modern Jonathan Swift. He managed to sneak social commentary in under the guise of science fiction, where you could have a program about people in contemporary society, and the situation would be very recognizable. Gene putting it on other planets and disguising it made the social commentary slip right past the censors. Unfortunately, it didn't, or fortunately, it did not pass by the college kids who were watching the show in reruns, and that's where much of Star Trek's popularity came from.
Yes, it was a wonderful show. You know, in your authorized biography of Gene Roddenberry, the one thing that really impressed me about it was the honesty of your book, because this was the official autobiography, and yet you painted Gene warts and all. You showed his character flaws as well as the things you did.
Well, he told me to do that. When he picked me to do this, he said, "I want a biography. I want you to do the biography." And I said, "Really? What kind do you want?" And he instantly answered, "Honest." And I said, really? He says, yes, absolutely, warts and all. I said, well, on that basis, Gene, are there any illegitimate children? And he looked up at the ceiling and I realized that I'd given him the straight line. And he fixed me with his hazel eyes and his killer salesman grin and smiled and said, no, but it wasn't for a lack of trying.
Very good. Well, I know that we're running out of time here, so I'll just mention that it was a very good book. I enjoyed it very much. I'm glad you joined us, and now Amy's going to tell you how you can get your own copy.
If you are a Star Trek fan, if you are a sci-fi fan, if you have fingers and can pick up the phone, hello, put down your popcorn. The Star Trek Creator is a must. It's a first edition, first print, signed by author. Hello, we share this special night with you with David Alexander. Now, you pick up your communicators and call 1-800-SCI-560. It's only $23.95. And we also have in here amazing, never-before-seen photographs from Gene and his wife Majel's own personal collection. $23.95. 1-800-SCI-560. The Star Trek Creator is a must. It's a first edition, first printed, signed by author. You saw him, David Alexander, here tonight, the wonderful interview. This is never before seen on TV. It's only $23.95. $23.95. Warren?
Thanks, Amy. You know, I love this book, and I wouldn't recommend anything that I haven't read and enjoyed. Now, stay tuned. When we come back, we'll give you a close-up look at one of the neatest props from one of the biggest science fiction films in recent memory.
Keeps asking me how to get a hold of this beautiful sci-fi shirt that Josh is wearing. If you notice, we have the Sci-Fi Channel logo on the front, and if Josh will model for us, we also have the logo on the back, which actually looks kind of like Saturn. The pattern is a beautiful galaxy in purple and black, and along with the shirt, we have a matching hat with an embroidered emblem logo, Sci-Fi Channel, on the front. The shirt goes for $19.95. The hat is $9.95. Such a deal. Go figure. Pick up your phones. Give us a call. You can wear the stuff while you're watching our show. And ladies, what a perfect gift for your boyfriend. The hat, one size fits all, no matter how big his head is. And I'm going to tell the crew the same thing I'm going to tell you. Back to you, Warren.
As you've been watching the show, you've seen that our room is filled with lots of interesting props from movies and TV shows. And every week we want to show you some special prop that we get to let you see something made from a real movie. What you're seeing here is the endo arm from Terminator 2 Judgment Day. This is the stunt prop that you saw thrown into the steel mill at the end of the movie.
And it was also carried around by John Connor in his backpack and when he was running around. An interesting story to this is there is really only one piece of the Terminator left at the end of the first movie, and that is the arm. End of the second movie. Terminators are destroyed, arm is destroyed, but in the conflict, one arm is severed in the machinery. Maybe that's a third movie.
Who knows? Arnold may be back. We'd like to thank Forrest J. Ackerman and George Koster for consulting with us on the show, and I'd like to thank the people who've helped us to fill the room with these wonderful toys and props, Mike Stenard and Jim Latta. Now, the Sci-Fi Trader would like... The Trader will be right back with more about our products and some thoughts about the future. The future has become the present and is about to become the past. We want to remind you of the interesting products we found for you. Amy.
We have the official Star Trek communicator and the impressive pewter figurines, Captain Kirk, Picard, Sisko, and Captain Amy. From Star Trek Voyager, be sure and call Paramount, have them cast me. Please?
And we also have David Alexander's book, The Biography of Gene Roddenberry. This is the official biography of Gene Roddenberry, and David has done a really outstanding job of digging out stories about Gene Roddenberry's early life, background information, history. He's found a number of interesting stories that you aren't going to find anyplace else, and he's been very careful in his research to cross-check things and make sure they're accurate. This is a really impressive book. I really enjoyed it, and I learned a lot from it. I learned a lot about Gene Roddenberry, and I learned a lot about television production from this book and seeing Gene's misadventures in trying to bring Star Trek to the television.
We also have what I think is a very cool shirt, which is available only here on the Sci-Fi Channel and only on this particular show, as well as the hat, which is reversible and one size fits all.
And now, as we are leaving, I want to thank David Alexander for joining us tonight. That was a wonderful interview we had. We had a lot of fun talking with him, and I want to thank Amy for being here with us.
Well, thank you for being here with me.
It was fun. It was fun. And Josh.
Thank you.
Now, before we go, I want to leave you with a final thought about time and the future. A thought from Tennessee Williams. He said, "The future is called perhaps, which is the only possible thing to call the future. And the important thing is not to allow that to scare you." I'm Warren James. This is the Sci-Fi Trader, and we'll see you in the future.